with the classics. Maimonides, in my opinion, and most people's opinion, is the beginning place if you're talking about classic Sephardic philosophers. He's the father of classic Sephardic philosophers, and he's perhaps the greatest mind that blended philosophy, theology, law, halakha. Nobody ever did it in his way. He was a unique individual. When it comes to the classics of the Spanish Kabbalah, in the 13th century in Spain, we spoke about Moses de Leon, who is, according to most accounts, the individual who brought the Zohar to light. He is the one who issued the Zohar. According to many, he compiled the Zohar. According to others, he wrote or composed several portions of the Zohar. Who actually wrote the Zohar, that we don't know, but what we do know is that it first emerged as a major text and as an influential text on many, many circles of speculative, contemplative mystics was in Spain in the 13th century. We then know, of course, that many of those brilliant minds in 1492 were expelled from Spain, made their way ultimately to the land of Israel because they felt it is now time to bring in the redemption, to bring in the Messiah. And by going up north, they sought to connect themselves in close proximity to the rabbis from the first century, particularly one rabbi we mentioned, who according to tradition is the traditional author of the Zohar, that is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is the traditional author of the Zohar. He is buried, according to tradition, in Meron. Meron is in the north of Israel, just opposite the city of Tzfat. If you're up on Tzfat, it's on a mountaintop. You sort of could see Meron, and there was a certain place, if you remember a few weeks ago, those who were with us, we studied the origins of the recitation of Lechadodi, the beautiful song that was composed in the 16th century in Tzfat, the poem, the Shabbat poem, the poem that welcomes the Shabbat, the whole notion of Kabbalat Shabbat, of greeting Shabbat with particular psalms, and Lechadodi. All of this was developed in Tzfat. Shlomo Alkabetz was the classic Sephardic Kabbalist who wrote this beautiful mystical poem. And there in Tzfat, when they stood out and went out into the fields to greet Shabbat, they did so facing not only the sun setting, but also facing the tomb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And as they were bringing in the feeling of Shabbat, they were also bringing in the power of the great Kabbalistic master, according to tradition. Shimon Bar Yochai was the original. He certainly, whether he was the author of the Zohar, he is, if you're looking at the Zohar as a novel, the main character. If you're looking at it as a script, if you were looking at the Zohar as a script and you had to cast characters, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would be your lead star. You'd have to find a really, really good actor to play Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his circle of friends. This is what the Kabbalah, this is what the Zohar is about. So what I'd like to do, just to sort of prepare us to enter into the world of Maimonides and then enter the world of the Zohar, right? Tonight we're going to engage in two classic Sephardic thinkers from earlier periods, from the 12th and 13th century, right? Of course, like I said, we're going to do so through the lenses of the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the holiday that comes afterwards, Sukkot. So what I'd like to do is to first introduce those holidays very quickly. Rosh Hashanah, what we call the new year, the beginning of the year. It's an odd beginning of the year because it's not on the first day of the first month. It's on the first day of the 7th month, the month of Tishrei. Next month, in a few weeks, the first day of the month of Tishrei is what we call Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. It's a little bit of a misnomer. It's misleading because Rosh Hashanah usually implies New Year. To most people, implies I switch to the calendar, I turn the page from December 31st to January 1st, to use that as the example that we're familiar with. That's not at all what Rosh Hashanah is about. In our liturgy and in the rabbinic teachings, there is a tradition that on the first day of the month of Tishrei, something took place. And in order to understand that, let's go back a few days before the first day of the month of Tishrei. According to a dispute that takes place in the Talmud disputed when was the world created? What month was the world created? So there is one opinion that posits that the world was created during the spring. There is one opinion that posits that the world was created in the fall. And so the opinion that ultimately, without getting into the Talmudic detail, ultimately Jewish tradition sided with the opinion that the world was created in the fall. And the way they actually, there's a very brilliant discussion about this in the Talmudic tractate, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, that actually deals with all of the laws of Rosh Hashanah, the blowing of the shofar and so on. Before it gets to the shofar, it tries to have us understand what is behind this date of the first of Tishrei. Why would we be observing any sort of beginning, right, on July 1st, right? January, February, March, April, May, June, July. Month 7, Happy New Year. What is that about, right? Why are we observing a Happy New Year on what's essentially the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar? The first month was the month of Nisan, the month when we celebrate Passover, the Exodus from Egypt. So why is this Rosh Hashanah? What is Rosh Hashanah about this? What's the beginning here? And so according to a very beautiful and intricate discussion in the Talmud says that actually day one of creation, first day of creation, when God started to create the world, right? Since for a whole host of reasons, they concluded that the world was indeed created in the fall and not in the spring. So they actually affixed a date, and they say day one of creation, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, when God created heaven and earth and so on, the first day, book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1, etc., right? You know what date was that? It was the 25th of this month, the month of Elul. The 25th day of the month of Elul was day one of creation. So now journey very easily. There are 29 days in the month of Elul. That means 25th, 26th, 27, 28, 29. The first 5 days of creation were in the month of Elul. All that is described in the Bible in chapter 1 that God created during those 5 days took place in this month. Then we went to the next month. There was only 29 days in the month of Elul, and we immediately go to the first of Tishrei. That's day 6 of creation. What happened on day 6 of creation? Adam and Eve were created. Therefore, what is Rosh Hashanah? It's not the beginning of a calendar year. It is the birthday of humanity. It is the birthday, it is the day that we were created. Adam and Eve were created on Rosh Hashanah. And we say in our liturgy, Hayom Harat Olam, today the world was born. And when we say the world was born, why are we saying today the world was born? Wasn't it born on the 25th of Elul? The physical world, the plants, the trees, the animals, everything else was born during those 5 days. But when we talk about birth of ideas, the birth of thinking, the birth of relationships, right? We speak of that in terms of human relationships, human experiences. Therefore, the world was born today on the first day of the month of Tishrei. That is, it's a new year where we're turning over a new human leaf and trying again. The question is, what are we trying for? So there's also a tradition that on the day that we were created, we celebrate birthdays by saying, let's go out and party and have a good time. Imagine if we were told that on our birthday, the day that we celebrate our birth is also the day that somebody's sitting in judgment over us, right? Whether we're going to live or die this coming year. And that's what we actually do on Rosh Hashanah. Hayom Harat Olam, today the world was born. Hayom Ya'amid B'mishpat, today the world is being judged. And the day of Rosh Hashanah, the classic name for Rosh Hashanah in rabbinic literature is Yom Hadin, Judgment Day. Not Judgment Day over the Jewish people, Judgment Day over all of humanity. The rabbinic tradition in the Mishnah and the Talmud teaches that Rosh Hashanah has an element of din, of a judgment, and the blowing of the shofar directly relates to that idea. You'll see where we go with that in a moment. Yom Kippur, 10 days later, Rosh Hashanah is on the 1st. Yom Kippur is on the 10th day of the month of Tishrei. 10 days later, Yom Kippur is a day of atonement, a day of purification, a day of renewal, if you will. And in rabbinic tradition, the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, from the 1st of Tishrei to the 10th, form a unit, a period of time called Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of Teshuvah. Teshuvah means to return, to repent, to come back to God, to come back to the right path, to try again, to cleanse ourselves, to try to create a renewal in the world through human behavior, through the way we interact with one another, okay? This is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then 4 days later, right? We then spend the time between Yom Kippur and another holiday that begins 4 days later called Sukkot. We build these beautiful booths, these huts that we dwell in them for a week, the holiday of Sukkot. And Sukkot is characterized by one characteristic: joy, right? Throughout the holidays, when we talk about the different days, when we talk about Rosh Hashanah, it's Yom Hadin, it's a day of judgment. Yom Kippur, a day of atonement, of purification. The holiday of Pesach is the anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt. The holiday of Shavuot, the anniversary of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. When we come to the holiday of Sukkot, we call it Zman Simchatenu, our season to rejoice, to celebrate, pure joy and happiness. All of this is important in order to understand how both Maimonides and the Zohar will journey us through these days. One more point about this month. The rabbis were masters at finding symbolism and acronyms in words. So it's very, very well known to those who know Hebrew, are familiar with the tradition, that this month, the month of Elul, spelled E-L-U-L in English, or in Hebrew, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed. There are some who discovered that Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Lamed stands for a verse that comes from the Song of Songs, the great love poem. And they say it stands for Ani ledodi vedodi li. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. Who is my beloved? Who I'm speaking? A human being is speaking and saying, I am my beloved's. Who's my beloved? God, and my beloved is mine, and we have a relationship. This is the month of Elul. According to this acronym, this teaches us that it is the time when it's mating season between God and human beings. When human beings seek their lover and the lover seeks the human being, we seek to mate. Keep this in mind. This is not at all how Maimonides sees it, but this is exactly the spirit of Ani ledodi vedodi li. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. This forms the core theology of how the Zohar understands life in general between the divine and the human being, between God and human beings here on earth, okay? And particularly how they're going to understand these holidays and how we'll explain them. Let's begin with Maimonides, okay? Since he came first. We'll begin with Maimonides. Maimonides, what I'm going to do is read to you a teaching from the Rambam where he talks about what it means to blow the shofar. Why do we blow the shofar? First, it's important to understand that the word shofar in relation to this holiday that we celebrate in a few weeks that we call Rosh Hashanah, nowhere is mentioned in the Torah. It never says blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah. That line never appears. It simply says on the first day of the 7th month shall be a day of blasting, Yom Tru'ah. Tru'ah is a note. It's one of the notes of the blasting of the shofar. It's actually the most frightening note. It's actually the most difficult of notes to blow. If you've heard the shofar, So Tkiya is the long toot, Shvarim is toot, 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 right? Tru'ah, toot, 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 like this, those kind of staccato notes, okay? This Tru'ah, it invokes fear and trembling. Tru'ah, that actual note, we find elsewhere in the Bible, we find elsewhere in the Torah, connected to going to war. The shofar was blown when they were going to war. There's an element of the way Soren Kierkegaard, the philosopher, would describe an element of fear and trembling. So Yom Tru'ah, it's a day of blasting that sound. And later tradition learned out that we blast many notes, including the note of Tru'ah, on Rosh Hashanah with an item called the shofar. But nowhere does the Torah give any reason why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Here is where somebody like Maimonides steps in one of the most unique teachings we find. Maimonides was the individual who wanted to understand reasons, rationale, philosophy, ideas behind the mitzvot, behind our observance of the commandments. Meaning, why is it that the Torah commands certain things? And most of the time, Maimonides didn't try to give a justification for the commandments. He didn't try to give an apology for the commandments. He didn't try to say things like, if you keep the dietary laws, it's better for your health. He was a physician and he never went in that direction to talk about things like that. Instead, whenever Maimonides sought to understand the reason behind a commandment, the rationale or the philosophy behind a commandment, he looked for a moral and ethical teaching embedded into the halakha, embedded into a Jewish legal practice. To blow the shofar, Maimonides says, is what we call in Hebrew, Gzerat HaKatuv. It is a verse in the Bible that commands us. And previous generations of rabbis, the rabbis in the Mishnah and the rabbis in the Talmud, tried to stay away from giving reasons. When you read the Talmud, why is it that we're supposed to blow the shofar? You're going to hate this answer. Why? Because it says so. Because the Torah says so. Because God commanded us, and we received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and we're bound as Jews to follow God's commandments. Why did God command this or that? We don't go there. That's the theology primarily in the largest book that we have in Judaism called the Talmud. The Talmud did not want to engage in the idea of ta'ameh hamitzvot, reasons for observing the commandments. There's all sorts of historical reasons behind that. Polemic against Christianity, there were disputes. So the rabbi said, don't ever try to say this commandment is more important. Don't ever try to say this represents having mercy. Stay away from it all and just say there's 613 commandments. Stay away from all those ideas and observe them because that's what you're commanded to do. And Maimonides agreed that we're commanded to observe God's law because Maimonides also believed that the Torah was a divine gift, that the Torah and the commandments were divine will, divine decree. That's why he composed his large work of halakha, so that we will understand every single law, because the Talmud is a very complicated book to sit and try to unpack every single page of the Talmud and all of the arguments. So Maimonides actually simplified it for us by giving us sort of a bullet point run through of the 613 commandments. You have all of Judaism in 14 books, well laid out beautifully, brilliantly, in very, very beautiful Hebrew, by the way. But Maimonides says, no, I'm a philosopher, I'm a thinker. There's got to be more to it. I want to know why. So already long before he wrote the Guide for the Perplexed, when he was first writing his commentary to the original rabbinic code called the Mishnah and the Talmud, but he wrote a commentary to the Mishnah. Already there, he was engaging in ideas that he later expounded upon in his Guide for the Perplexed and in other writings. His philosophical ideas, his ideas of saying it's very, very important to think and understand why it is we're doing what we're doing. So Maimonides, when it comes to the shofar, says the following thing. He says, even though, and by the way, where did he write this? In one of the most brilliant and unique sections of Jewish law, unique to Maimonides, okay? Very, very unique section of the Mishneh Torah is a book called Hilchot Tshuva, the laws of repentance. This, by the way, if you lift out the laws of repentance from Maimonides' work of halakha, of Jewish law, it will serve as one of the greatest, self-improvement. I hate the term self-help because it always comes as kind of a sham, people who just try to sell you the newest self-help book. Maimonides, what he wrote in the 12th century, Hilchot Tshuva, is an exercise in human nature, is an understanding, is a probing of the human condition, and it understands the complexity and the frailty of the human condition. And Maimonides seeks to help us come back. How do we repair our relationship with God? How do we repair our relationship with the world around us? And how do we repair our relationship with other human beings? How do I ask for forgiveness? And how do I forgive? The whole idea of forgive, forget. If I feel wronged and somebody approaches me and says, I'd like to sit down with you and discuss what's the psychology behind accepting the apology? What's the psychology around getting up and taking the step to apologize? All of this Maimonides lays out. He's the only individual to do so because, again, he, as a philosopher and as a thinker, as a philosopher of Jewish law, was concerned, how are we going to approach Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Why did Maimonides do this? Why did he write the laws of Tshuva, Hilchot Tshuva, right? Which, again, by the way, in the laws of Tshuva, there's absolutely no discussion whatsoever in how God is going to react to us. It's all about how we approach God. It's all about how I approach my wife, or how my friend, my business partner, my neighbor, my colleague. It's all about human relationships vis-a-vis God and vis-a-vis one another. Why was this important for Maimonides, especially as it relates to the relationships, what we call in Hebrew, ben adam lechavero, between human beings? Because Maimonides was well aware that it's paradoxically a lot easier to ask forgiveness of the divine than to ask forgiveness of our friends. It's a lot easier to have a conversation with God than to put the prayer book down when you don't have a script and you simply have to look at your friend who you feel you've wronged or you feel you've been wronged by and to engage in a conversation. Maimonides gets all of this, by the way, from the rabbinic tradition. Maimonides was fidel to the rabbinic tradition. And the rabbinic tradition, when it came to Yom Kippur, said, Yom Kippur, the day of Yom Kippur, automatically affects atonement for all transgressions between man and God. Ben Adam Lamakom, meaning if you fast on Yom Kippur and you pray and you're devoted to the tradition, the liturgy, and you follow all of the rituals, the day of Yom Kippur forgives and atones for anything that you may have transgressed, whatever that list of transgressions may be, whether they are ritual transgressions, whether they are moral or ethical transgressions, to a degree, of course, right? Any transgression which is something that is forgivable according to the Jewish tradition, the day of Yom Kippur will forgive that transgression vis-a-vis your relationship with God. But when it comes to transgressions between man and man, between an individual, between one individual and another, the rabbinic tradition says, the Mishnah says, Yom Kippur does not forgive those transgressions, right? At all. You could fast 48 hours and pray double and say all of the prayers 2-3 times each if you want. It will never ever affect atonement until the two individuals sit down and talk. And Maimonides, the philosopher, said, rabbis from the Mishnah, that's great. The problem is you haven't taught us how to do that. So I'm going to teach you how to do that. And he wrote a multi-chapter book called The Laws of Repentance, the journey towards reconciliation. And so Maimonides, in the spirit of all of this, says the following thing. When it comes to the sounding of the shofar, the blowing of the shofar, remember, this is a very important teaching regarding the shofar, just as an aside, is that it's a unique commandment. It's a unique experience in Judaism. For most of the commandments, when we engage in one of the commandments, we make a blessing over the act, right? That means if I'm going to light a Hanukkah candle, I say, "Blessed are you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who commanded us to kindle a Hanukkah flame," and then I light. You commanded us to dwell in a sukkah, and then I sit in the sukkah. You commanded us to light Shabbat candles, etc. Here, the individual, remember, we stand in the synagogue and we don't have hundreds of people blowing the shofar. One individual blows the shofar on behalf of the whole community. And there was a dispute in the Talmud and in the later commentaries as to what blessing the individual who's going to blow the shofar, what blessing does he recite? According to some authorities, the blessing had to follow in the exact same pattern as all the blessings, a recitation of a blessing over the act. He's going to blow the shofar. So he should say in Hebrew, Asher kichanu b'tzutav tzivanu al tkiyat shofar. You've commanded us to blow the shofar. Maimonides and other authorities disagreed, and ultimately their viewpoint prevailed. That the blessing is not about blowing the shofar. The blessing is about making the sound of the shofar heard. Asher kichanu b'tzutav tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. There's no commandment to blow. The individual who's blowing the shofar is facilitating the opportunity for everyone to hear the sound of the shofar. This is a unique mitzvah where all we have to do is listen. Sounds easy, right? I always use that as a metaphor. I say it's easy to listen, right? Think about that in your relationship with your spouse, with your neighbors, with your friends. It's easy to listen, right? It's the most difficult thing to do. We always want to hear ourselves. We don't want to listen to others. Here, we're supposed to just stand. There's no words. There's nothing being said, nothing communicated, just notes, just music. And we're standing for 5 minutes, and all we're doing is lishma, to hear. So Maimonides says, wow, there's got to be more to it than just God said so. So Maimonides says, here I'm going to introduce a teaching about the shofar that's going to give you a deeper insight. This is a classic piece of philosophy woven into the law, classic Maimonidean style. He was the master at this. I'm going to read it to you. Maimonides says, even though, and this again, he's writing this in a book of halakha, of Jewish law. This is not from the Guide of the Perplexed. Guide of the Perplexed is a book of philosophy where he's sitting and contemplating ideas. Here, Maimonides, the Rambam, is writing a book of law. And in the book of law, he introduces, you will not find what I'm saying, by the way, in any other book of law, not in the Shulchan Aruch or in any other code of law will you find ideas. You'll simply find laws. Maimonides weaves ideas into it because you can't divorce the legal mind and the philosopher. It's not that he was this great rabbi during the day who dabbled in ideas at night. He studied the Talmud by day, and at night when nobody was watching, he read Plato and Aristotle. That's not who Maimonides was. He not only had the Talmud open together with Aristotle on the same desk, but tried to blend and bring those ideas together. And so here, look what Maimonides does. He introduces an idea. He says, even though the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a written decree in the Torah, even though you could say that's what it is, it contains a remez, a hint to a deeper message. And here's what he says that deeper message is. He says, it is as if the shofar's voice, the shofar's notes, the shofar's call is saying, wake up, you sleepy ones from your sleep, and you who slumber, arise, inspect your deeds, repent, and remember your Creator. Look inside your souls, improve your ways and your deeds, and let every one of you abandon his evil path and thoughts. This is a centerpiece teaching of Maimonides of the Rambam. The Rambam is saying, when we hear the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it is meant to awaken us. It is meant to open our eyes, to open our hearts, to penetrate into our souls deep down and to say, it's time for me to improve. It's time for me to effect tikkun olam by changing myself, not demanding of others to change, not screaming out and saying others are wrong, but I'm always right. It's time for me to take a look in the mirror. I heard those sounds. Now I'm going to look in the mirror and I don't see my body. I don't see my clothing. I see, metaphorically, my soul. And I inspect the inside and I see that something's wrong and I need to improve it. All of the responsibility of what's going to happen in the world, and if our prayers are indeed going to be heard properly, is all upon human beings. The future of the world, the good that the world could have, ultimately depends on whether I follow the evil path and thoughts or change my path to good path, to self-improvement, to bringing about a better society, to try to make the world a better place to live, to try to observe the Torah in a more effective way, in a more meaningful way, whichever way I choose to observe Judaism, to make it more meaningful, to make it more effective for myself, to continue to engage in self-perfection. That means, according to Maimonides, whatever I do here on earth is going to improve the earth or is going to bring about destruction to the earth. It's all up to me here on earth. Does anything I do affect God? Meaning, is God happy or sad if I'm good or evil? No, that is not the Maimonidean theology. God gave us a script called the Torah. God gave us a code of morals and ethics and values, commandments, in order to make the world, through one individual at a time, a better place to live. And on Rosh Hashanah, when I hear the sound of the shofar, it's not just that I've fulfilled the commandment of hearing the shofar. It's not that I've just heard the sound that my parents and grandparents heard and how beautiful and it's traditional and so on. It's supposed to awaken me to say, it's time to begin a process of self-transformation. And if I and the rest of my community engage in that pattern, starting today throughout these 10 days leading up to Yom Kippur, we're going to make the world a better place as per God's will. It's all up to us. This is the Maimonidean theology. With that, we're going to move to the Zohar. The Zohar, presents a very, very different picture about what happens. The Zohar reads the high holidays, the holidays of Tishrei, as the telling of a story. Indeed, they read the whole Jewish calendar as the telling of a story. What kind of story? I would call it a narrative of a divine cosmic drama. That which happens here affects what happens in heaven. That theology, that divine cosmic drama, stands at the core and the heart of the Zohar's mystical Kabbalistic teachings, and in their mind, at the heart of Jewish life and of human life. Because don't forget, both when it comes to Maimonides and to the Zohar, we, the Jewish people, the chosen people, remember I mentioned something earlier, which I wonder if it caught your attention. I said, Rosh Hashanah is not a judgment day for Jewish people. It's a judgment day for all of humanity. The Jewish tradition believes that the first of Tishrei is the anniversary of the creation of human beings. Hayom Harat Olam, today we were born. Adam and Eve were created. It's the anniversary of their creation. And therefore, when we're praying and trying to seek self-improvement on Rosh Hashanah, we're not doing so on behalf of the Jewish people. We're doing so on behalf of all of humanity. Rosh Hashanah is the ultimate tikkun olam. It's the ultimate attempt to try to improve all of society, to effect a positive change in the universe. And as far as the Zohar is concerned, even in the cosmos, in heaven above, that which we do here very, very deeply affects that which happens in heaven above. What is that divine drama, that cosmic drama that I'm talking about, according to the Zohar? Okay, it is, to put it in simple terms, but in direct terms. It's not so simple, it's actually direct. Okay, it is a struggle of good against evil, of, let's say, health against plague and sickness, something we could very much relate to now. It's a struggle of love versus alienation and oppression. And later on, as we saw in the Kabbalists of Tzfat, who went to Israel, it is the struggle of redemption, messianic redemption, versus the lonely status, the negative status of exile, of being dispersed amongst the nations and not being in the promised land, the Holy Land. Okay? Basically, to put it simple, it's a struggle between light and darkness. This is the Zohar's theology, and that struggle is going on in heaven above. It's important to understand that that divine cosmic drama is not independent from that which takes place here on earth, but indeed it's influenced by the deeds of human beings. In order to have you understand that, I want to read something to you. Last time, or a few weeks ago, I don't remember when it was, I read to you from the writings of, when we were talking about Tzfat, I read to you a piece of a story by the first ever Israeli author and the only Israeli author to date to have won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He won it in 1966. His name was Shmuel Yosef Chachkes, and he eventually, in 1908, he was born in Poland. His name was Shmuel Yosef Chachkes, and in 1908, when he lived in the land of Israel, he moved to the land of Israel, Palestine, in 1908. And there he wrote a story called Agunot. It's his first story. And there he signed his name for the first time, Shai Agnon. You've heard of Agnon. He took his name, it's his nom de plume, from the story Agunot that he wrote. I want to read to you only a few sentences from his opening chapter of his very, very first story that he wrote. Agnon was very, very deeply influenced by Kabbalistic ideas. And in order for you to understand what I mean, that different than Maimonides, who said, if my friends and I engage in reconciliation, that's going to affect the world positively because we engaged in reconciliation. If we make peace between human beings, the world will be better because there will be peace between human beings. If human beings seek the divine, the world will be more spiritual because human beings seek the divine. The divine is there. God is there. God gave the commandments, left it up to us to behave good or evil. What we do down here affects us, does not affect the divinity above. That's Maimonides. But when it comes to the Kabbalists, everything we do down here affects above. This is why I want to read to you the opening lines of Agnon's story, Agunot, and with that you'll understand. He opens his story with a parable that is drawn straight from the Zohar, straight from Kabbalistic literature. He puts his own spin on it, of course. I'm going to read it to you in English translation. He originally wrote this in Hebrew, but let me read and you'll understand what I mean by affecting human beings here, affecting what happens in heaven. He opens by saying, it is said, a thread of grace is spun and drawn out of the deeds of the Jewish people. And the Holy One, blessed be he himself, in his glory, sits and weaves strand upon strand, a talit made fully of grace and all of mercy for the Jewish people to deck themselves in. So here's the parable that Agnon draws, that a thread of grace is spun out of, drawn out of our deeds. And God takes each of these threads of grace meaning good deeds, and God weaves a beautiful talit in heaven. And when our deeds are good, God weaves the most beautiful talit and covers us in the talit, the prayer shawl. It's all a parable. This is the way the Zohar spoke, meaning our deeds down here, when they're positive, when they're good, God takes each good deed, treats it like a thread, and God is weaving a very, very, very beautiful talit, a beautiful prayer shawl. And once all of our good deeds have made the most beautiful talit in the world, God covers us, wraps us in that beautiful talit, and there's this very, very beautiful relationship expressed through this talit that was created by our good deeds. And Agnon goes on to talk about, straight again from the Zohar, how this talit is an act, is an expression of the deep love between the Jewish people, human beings on earth, and God in heaven above. But then he continues, he says, but there are times, alas, when some hindrance creeps up and snaps a thread in the loom. Then the talit is damaged. Evil spirits hover about, enter into it, and tear it to shreds. If something goes wrong here, the talit that God is weaving, the thread could snap, and the entire talit unravels. With that idea in mind, from Agnon, I want you to understand this divine drama that's taking place in the Zohar. If human beings misbehave, it negatively affects the cosmos, and darkness overtakes light, evil overtakes good. Now, why is that, by the way? Because a few times in our earlier classes, I talked about different attributes of God. Remember, according to the Zohar, according to the Kabbalists, according to mysticism, God, who sits on a throne in heaven above, emanates various attributes of God: wisdom, strength, glory, beauty. We saw a geometric chart called the Sefirot, the Emanations. There are 10 of them. The highest one, the one that sits on the top of that geometric chart, is called Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. God emanates, the Holy One, blessed be He, emanates a whole variety of different attributes of God. The lowest one, the one that's closest to earth, the one that's closest to us here on earth, is what's called the Shekinah. The Shekinah, originally, what does the word Shekinah mean? Comes from the word Mishkan, Lishkon, presence. The Asuli Mikdash, God commands us in the Bible, you shall make for me a sacred place, V'shachanti betocham, and I will therefore dwell amongst them. How do we bring the divine here on earth? The Kabbalists said that there are divine emanations, right? The Sefirot, the chart that we had seen, the geometric chart. Those who haven't seen it, you could look it up. Just go on Google, look up the 10 Sefirot, look at the images, and you'll find exactly what I'm describing. And you'll see that above is the Keter, the crown of God, Kucha Brichu, Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? And the Shekinah. Now, Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, the rabbis called the Holy One, blessed be He, in male formulation, in Zachar. The Shekinah, the term Shekinah, is in the feminine. To the Kabbalists, whose imagery was all about relationships, the unity of a relationship between the male and the female, the Kabbalists said that the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, in heaven above, all the way at the top of the chart, and the Shekinah, which is the lowest part, ultimately want to unify. They want to come together. Now, how does that happen? The Shekinah that is on the lowest part of that chart is the element of God closest to us, to human beings. And the goal, of course, is to unify ourselves with God, and our deeds here, if we behave properly, will affect the Shekinah, will affect the feminine side of God that is closest to us. That's the closest side of God that is to humanity. And if we behave properly, if we're ethical, if we're moral, if we follow the commandments, if we follow the proper path of God, if we engage in proper behavior, we will affect a Kabbalistic, mystical tikkun olam. We will repair the universe, because ultimately, if God sitting on the throne, the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the male element, right, is alienated from the Shekinah, then it's like a couple of lovers who have been torn apart for some reason, some negative reason. Something happened, some negativity took place. Evil deeds, our evil deeds, can tear those lovers apart. As long as we misbehave, we do not allow the Shekinah and the Holy One, blessed be He, to unify and to become one. And so what is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, according to the Zohar? It is the journey to try to reunify the Kucha Brichu, the Holy One, blessed be He, the highest form of God that sits on the throne above, and the Shekinah, the element of God that is portrayed in the feminine, that we have a closest connection to. And when the Shekinah is able to absorb from close to us positivity, slowly but surely we help reunify. And when they are in a state of union, when there is a unison between the Kucha Brichu and Shekinah, then we've repaired the universe. We've brought the universe back to its original pristine state, a state of light, a state of love, a state of positivity. So here is how the Zohar presents this on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. They say, what is Rosh Hashanah? Remember, Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of human beings, of male and female, that were both created in the image of God. The Rabbi, the Kabbalists say, Rosh Hashanah is the day when we seek to wipe out the forces of evil that create a blockade between the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekinah. How do we do that? How do we get the Shekinah closer to God, unified to God? Well, I mentioned that the Kabbalists developed actually a series of formulas that before each and every commandment, before each time they pray, before the blowing of the shofar, before any commandment, they recite L'shem yichud kucha brichu ushkinte, in the name, for the sake of the unification of the kucha brichu, the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekinah. To unify them together is to create unison and harmony in the world. And when there is divine harmony, there is human harmony, but there could only be divine harmony if we don't behave or misbehave. Otherwise, there is a thread in that talit that snapped, and the whole thing can unravel, and it creates a separation between the Shekinah and God and the Holy One, blessed be He. And as a result, there cannot be harmony in the world. The world continues to be in a broken place. So what is the journey of Rosh Hashanah? According to the Zohar, it is to say that on this day, when we seek to begin the process of tshuva, on the anniversary when human beings were created, it is the day when we must begin a journey towards one another, when we are meant to return to God and to each other. And when we return to God and we return to one another, and we do it properly, with full heart, with full kavanah, we are allowing the lovers to return together. That's the imagery that's presented in the Zohar. That when we, down here, it's not like Maimonides said, what we do here affects only here, and God is what it is. God gave us the laws, God gave us the path on how to be good, and gave us freedom of choice. The Kabbalists also believe that God gave us freedom of choice. But as long as we choose evil, there is a disharmony, a discord in the heavens. The heavens are not at one. And therefore, God's presence in the world cannot really be felt. And therefore, evil overtakes. When evil overtakes good, when darkness overtakes light, that's because we have misbehaved. When racism, when violence, when Hitler, when anything that seeks to dominate the world with darkness, when that type of behavior overtakes the world, that prevents God from having dominion over the world. That tears God and the Shekinah apart, and they cannot be in unison. So that means everything we do, if we pray, if we hear the sound of the shofar properly, if we fast, and if we, most importantly, ask of our fellow man forgiveness and try to create peace and harmony in the world, not only are we going to make society better, but we're going to bring the true presence of God back into the universe, because we're going to allow the lovers to come back together and unify. They've been ripped apart by evil deeds. And only by a reconciliation between human beings, by a tikkun olam, a Kabbalistic tikkun olam, which means we repair the universe and we help repair the relationship up in heaven above between the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekinah. Only in that sense, when we're able to do that, are we able to bring the world to a better place. And so they say, indeed, Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of that process. And the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is a journey, is the return of what? What we hope to be a return of the lovers one to the other. Then on Yom Kippur, the Zohar describes that the Shekinah, if everything has gone well, if we've properly heard the shofar, if we indeed spent the 10 days of between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, not only praying, but also trying to repair and mend relationships between people here on earth, if we've done all that with pure heart and pure sincerity, it's not just that we're going to feel better. It's not just that we're going to make society or our community better, but we're going to slowly but surely allow the Shekinah to travel back into the arms of God. The lovers are going to reunite. And if it all works out beautifully, Yom Kippur is when they meet again and they renew their vows. It's a day of purity. It's a day of cleanliness, of holiness. It's the holiest day of the year. And according to Jewish tradition, what is the holiest moment? When a bride and groom get married. The tractate in the Talmud for marriage is called Masechet Kiddushin. It comes from the word kadosh. Hare at mekudeshet li. When the groom places a ring on the bride's finger and he says, Hare at mekudeshet li. You're hereby sacred to me through this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. The act of marriage is sacred. Yom Kippur is the holiest day. It's the day of purity. It's the day of cleansing. It's a day of new beginning. And it's the day when Kadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekinah, if we've properly behaved, are renewing their vows. Now, if you think that the writers of the Zohar didn't understand how to write a script, a beautiful script, it has a happy ending. And it's called Sukkot. Because they said, if we've indeed celebrated Rosh Hashanah properly, if we've indeed introspected on Rosh Hashanah, and throughout the 10 days, spent the days trying to build love, not hate, trying to build light, not darkness, trying to heal illness if we can, physically or metaphorically, emotional illness, physical illness if we're talented and gifted and professional enough to do so. If we engage in good, wow, what a great formula for an election season, right? Challenging during an election time to do this, right? But maybe it's properly timed every 4 years during an election season at the high holidays, and the Zohar comes and teaches us, no matter what side we hold, are we able to hear one another, like we're hearing the sound of the shofar? Are we able to love each other despite differences? Are we able to engage in positive dialogue? And the Zohar says it's not just about here on earth. As long as you engage in hate speech, in negative and divisive speech, in Lashon Hara, in speaking evil and gossip and creating rumors and all sorts of nonsense that destroys the world and destroys relationships. There is no divine unison. There is no sanctity here on earth. It can't be, because we have alienated the lovers. The Shekinah and the Kadosh Baruch Hu are just farther torn apart. But if we've done it properly, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah, we started the reconciliation process. And on Yom Kippur, we celebrated the vows, the renewal of the vows. And remember what I said Sukkot is? We call Sukkot Zman Simchatenu, the festival of celebration. And what are we celebrating on Sukkot? The marriage that just took place. We're celebrating, we have an 8-day celebration, a holiday that we sing and celebrate, and we sit outside in a beautiful hut, and we eat beautiful foods, and we invite guests into our sukkah. We invite the Shiva Ushpizin, the 7 guests that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the biblical guests, and patriarchs and matriarchs, and all sorts of amazing people that are spiritually invited into the temporary home that we live outdoors, this beautiful booth and hut that we celebrate, that we decorate. According to the Zohar, the journey of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot is a journey of reconciliation between human beings, which leads to divine unity, the marriage that takes place on Yom Kippur, and the celebration of that unity on Sukkot. What a very beautiful pattern that the Kabbalists set out for what Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot are all about. Maimonides also said a beautiful idea. Maimonides had a different theology. Maimonides said it's all up to us. Our behavior, we have to engage in this behavior because it is the divine will. God wants the world to be a better place. That is why God gave us the Torah. That is why God commanded us to respect human beings, to respect property, to respect parents, to respect human life itself. That is why God gave us all of the traditions that developed about morals and ethics and values. And God gave us freedom of choice to do with it as we will. If we abandon it, it's disastrous on earth. If we adopt it in a pure and beautiful way, it will bring about the true realization of the divine will. But it doesn't affect God one way or the other. The Kabbalists painted a different picture. And they said, yes, everything we do, it's a theurgical, what's called a theurgical pattern, where what we do here, every mitzvah, every positive good deed affects the cause, affects the divine. Every negative deed also negatively affects the divine and that relationship. This is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, your first taste of classic Sephardic teachings from the master Jewish philosopher Rambam Maimonides, and from the central text of Sephardic Kabbalistic teachings called the Zohar, which became the international bestseller of Jewish mysticism around the world, just like Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed became the international bestseller of classic Aristotelian / Jewish philosophy, right? What's beautiful to remember, and I always emphasize this throughout, is that when we talk about, so often people come and say, can you give a lecture about Sephardic contributions to civilization? That's, of course, understanding the world from a very, what I would call Ashkenormative understanding, that, the world revolves around only what took place in Eastern Europe starting in the 18th century. Those who were in my class for the 7 weeks understand that everything that developed in Eastern Europe, called Hasidut, the Hasidic world, would have never happened if the Spanish Kabbalists hadn't written all of these texts in Tzfat. This eventually brought its way to the development of Hasidut in the world that took place there. So the Sephardic contributions to not only Jewish culture and civilization, but indeed to the history of human thought, of Western thought, of Eastern thought, are tremendous. They cast a wide net from Aristotelian thinking all the way to mystical thinking. from the very rational world of Maimonides to the beautiful mystical journey painted to us by the Zohar. In the coming weeks, we're going to be examining some of the other Sephardic rabbis, even rabbis from the 20th century, who have given us some very, very beautiful ideas, who have borrowed from Maimonides or have borrowed from the Zohar and other classic texts of mysticism to present new perspectives based on different times and circumstances that they were living in, whether they were living in Morocco or in Greece or in Jerusalem during particular periods of time. All of this affected their thinking and continues to engage us in the search for meaning. This is the theme of Maimonidean rationalism or Kabbalistic mysticism, is a search for extra meaning. And ultimately, if you sat Maimonides at the table with the Kabbalists, maybe they come at it from a different place. Maimonides will say, my theology is not about affecting the divine, it's about repairing the world here. And the Kabbalists will say, no, we really do believe that there's a divine drama taking place and we affect it. The Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Shekinah, they have different ways of looking at it, but they both agree on one thing, that everything that we do as Jews, as human beings, should be done with meaning, should be done not as a simple ritual walkthrough just because, but that there is meaning, purpose, and value to whatever it is that we're doing. And both would point to the term tikkun olam, not the tikkun olam term that we hear today that's used in political connotations, but a tikkun olam, which means to repair society, to repair the torn society between human beings, between different people of different faiths and backgrounds and countries, to try to bring a unity here on earth. This was the vision of Maimonides. It's a messianic vision. This is the vision of the Zohar of the Kabbalah. So it was my pleasure to begin this journey with you tonight. Next week, we're going to continue that. Just to announce that in 2 weeks, we're going to have a very, very unique program. You may have seen it in our email. We'll put it on Facebook as well. In 2 weeks, it is going to be the anniversary of the passing of two magnificent exemplars of the classic Sephardic tradition in the 20th century, a rabbi and student, Rabbi Uziel, who was the first Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He was the chief rabbi even before the state of Israel was declared in 1948. He served under the Ottoman Empire, under the British Mandate, and then the state of Israel. Rabbi Uziel had a magnificent, brilliant, lovely student named Rabbi Avraham Shalem. Zichrono Libracha. Rabbi Uziel passed away in 1953. Rabbi Shalem passed away about, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago. I never knew Rabbi Uziel. He passed away before I was born. But I was privileged to have developed a wonderful, beautiful relationship with Rabbi Shalem towards the end of his life. I met him the last 2 or 3 years that he was alive in Jerusalem, and I used to spend a lot of time with him when I was in Israel, studying with him, visiting with him, learning from him. He was a prince of a gentleman, an amazing individual, and joining me in observing now both Rabbi Uziel and Rabbi Shalem died many years apart, but they both passed away in the month of Elul. One passed away, Rabbi Shalem passed away on the 23rd day of the month of Elul. Rabbi Uziel passed away on the 24th day of the month of Elul. So Rabbi Mark Angel and I are going to be co-hosting a special session that's not next week, but 2 weeks from tonight, in loving memory of the master and his teacher, Rabbi Uziel and Rabbi Shalem. Both Rabbi Mark Angel, my colleague and mentor from New York, both of us share a deep relationship with both of these individuals. Neither of us knew Rabbi Uziel, but Rabbi Angel has written a very, very beautiful book on Rabbi Uziel, the only English language biography of Rabbi Uziel, called Loving Truth and Peace. Rabbi Angel and I are now in the process of working on a republication of that book, which is now going to include a second section that I'm working on with original translations of about 20 pieces of Rabbi Uziel's writings. So both of us have a deep affinity and love for Rabbi Uziel. And as far as Rabbi Shalem, whereas I knew Rabbi Shalem towards the end of his life, Rabbi Angel knew Rabbi Shalem from when Rabbi Angel was a child in Seattle, because Rabbi Shalem served for about 3 years as a rabbi in the Sephardic community in Seattle. So they knew, he knew him from childhood, and of course stayed in touch and followed his career throughout. So he was one of Rabbi Angel's first teachers. So in 2 weeks from now, we'll be having a special program, myself and Rabbi Angel. But please God, next week we'll be back, same time, same channel, for more teachings of the classic philosophical and Kabbalistic traditions. Tonight we started with the real classics, the giants, Maimonides and the Zohar. Next time we're going to continue with some other diverse voices, both from the philosophic tradition and the Kabbalistic tradition, all with the goal of opening your minds and your hearts, and hopefully, please God, in a few weeks, if you're in synagogue or wherever you are this year for Rosh Hashanah, wherever you'll be, that you'll have a more meaningful experience, because that's what they both wanted. So thank you all for being with me again tonight. Like always, if you have questions, please feel free to email me during the week. Our email is info@secjerusalem.org. If you'd like to help us out during this time, we always appreciate any help that you can give us. We offer these classes because we want to open them to the world. But like all organizations, we're in a little bit of a trying time right now. So anything that you could ever do to reach out to help us during the high holidays, I guess that's the rabbinical side in me, that on the high holidays, we always seek some support. It's important to please support us. We really try to bring these teachings to light for everyone. So whatever else you could do, it's also a great support just to see so many people with us, especially new faces that haven't been part of us. If you want to be on our email list, if you're not yet on our email list, please email me. I know I did put this on Facebook, so many of you saw it there. But if you'd like to be part of our weekly emails where we send some writings and we have other programs coming up, I'm just going to make one more announcement. Every year, for the last probably 9 or 10 years, the SEC Sephardic Educational Center has sponsored put on a very beautiful concert between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of the Slichot. As we know, the penitential prayers that we recite called Slichot in the Sephardic tradition are beautiful. They're uplifting. They have a musical quality to them, all their own. And for years and years and years, we've always held a beautiful Slichot concert where we brought Sephardic cantors and musicians, Middle Eastern musicians, to accompany them and to play the Slichot in a beautiful concert. Unfortunately, this year, due to the whole situation, the pandemic, we're not going to be able to have that concert here in person, but we're going to try to do so. We're going to be doing something which is even going to be unique, and I don't know if it's better, but it's different. We will be having a Slichot concert that's going to be streamed from our center in the Old City in Jerusalem, from our beautiful Sephardic courtyard. We're just finalizing the date with the cantors and the musicians. I've been on the phone with them the last couple of nights trying to nail down a proper date when they're all available, and we will let you know when it is and how you'll be able to log in and participate and to hear the Slichot chanted from the Old City of Jerusalem, from one of the classic Sephardic locations in the world, our headquarter campus, the SEC, the Sephardic Educational Center. So I know that some people had some questions here. I will take the questions and I'll respond to you via email because I want, in the interest of time, I want to, those who have other things to do. And I know we also have people on the East Coast for whom it's 9:30 in the evening. So I also want to thank always our very devoted and wonderful co-sponsors who help us publicize this on Facebook. I want to thank Ethan Marcus of the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood. Thank you, Ethan, for always being there, for putting on a wonderful array of classes that the Sephardic Brotherhood is doing. We're also going to be engaged in a Slichot program with them. So it's beautiful to see the organizations working together, the Sephardic Brotherhood, the Sephardic Educational Center, It's very, very much in the spirit of what both Maimonides and the Zohar would like, is to see unity between people. Every organization comes at it with a different strength, a different angle. When we're able to bring them together and not have a sense of competition, but instead have a sense of working together for unison, we're able to create a better society. So I want to wish all of you lots of love, good health, stay safe, stay healthy. I'm not wearing my mask now, but because I'm indoors, but otherwise, please wear the mask. Maimonides, don't forget, was a physician, a doctor, wrote medical books, and I promise you, he'd be wearing a mask, and he would ask every single one of us to be wearing our masks. So please do, and he would say it's a divine commandment to do so. So wishing all of you a lot of love, a lot of light, a lot of unity. Use this month of Elul for proper tikkun, for reconciliation, for reparation of all of our any faults that we may have. Let's try to improve and create a beautiful journey the way both Rambam, Maimonides, and the Zohar would like us to. Looking forward to seeing all of you next week. Shavua Tov. A lot of blessings to all of you. Thank you so much.